Let's face it, nobody likes being sick. However, regardless of who you are, at some point in time in your life, you will be sick, or you'll have some form of injury. In these instances, most of the population will find themselves going to the emergency room. However, most of these patients have a sense of frustration as they wait to be seen. This is because patients have a love-hate relationship for the emergency room. However, when faced with illness or injury, 9 times out of 10, that's where these people will be found. So why do we go to the emergency room? Most of the time, people go to the emergency room for minor injuries and ailments. These range from fever, stomach cramps, or even spraining an ankle playing sports. Regardless of the reason for going there, most people have a sense of dread when they enter the emergency department, and that's mainly for 2 reasons. One being the long wait periods that people have when they go to the emergency department. And the second reason is the sense of inadequate treatment that they got once they were seen. Now let's start with the wait times. When a person goes to the emergency department and they check in, usually between 15 and 30 minutes after they arrive, they are screened and triaged. Now initially this doesn't seem like a long period of time until you understand the triage categories. Triage categories range from 1 to 5, with 4 and 5 being the minor injuries and ailments in which I'm speaking of. These are the people that have the longest wait times. As a matter of fact, in an article by Todd Neal, the national average wait time in the emergency department is over 4 hours. The second aspect is that sense of inadequate treatment once you have been seen. Parents will take their children in for having a fever, only to be discharged with Tylenol or Motrin. Someone will come in with an allergic reaction and just be given Benadryl. Or someone with tremendous knee pain will be discharged with some ACE wraps and some crutches and told to rest. Diagnosis and treatments like these cause a lot of animosity between patients and emergency staff. However, what if I were to tell you there were a guaranteed way to reduce the amount of times you ever had to be seen in the emergency department? Or when you did go, you would not receive these treatments when you went. Now, we're talking about minor injuries and ailments. And with those, there's a plethora of home remedies in which you can do on your own. So let's start with some basic pharmacology. There are basic over-the-counter medications which every person should have in their cabinets. These are Tylenol, Motrin, Benadryl, Robitussin, Pepto-Bismol, and Mylanta. Armed with these medications, some Band-Aids, and some ACE wraps, you can effectively treat roughly 70% of the illnesses and injuries which most people would go to the emergency room for. To express what I'm talking about, let me go through some scenarios with you. You wake up one morning and your head hurts. You find out you have a fever. You have some nausea, a little bit of vomiting, some diarrhea. So what do? Instead of rushing to the emergency room, you would first start with taking some Tylenol. Tylenol will help reduce the fever and will help with the head pain. You don't want to use Motrin because Motrin requires food, and since you've been vomiting, you won't be able to hold it down. Now, since you are vomiting, you are feeling nauseous, you want to increase your fluid intake so you don't become dehydrated. Water's great. If you can't keep those down, ginger ale is very good for that. And 7-Up. Once you've been able to keep clear liquids down, then you would start on what's called a BRAT diet. BRAT stands for bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. Now, when your body makes you feel nauseated and vomiting and you have diarrhea, it's your body's way of trying to get rid of something that's causing you to feel sick in the first place. So initially, you don't want to stop these processes. but you do want to control them somewhat. So for the diarrhea, you would take some Pepto-Bismol. With these simple steps, you can effectively treat 80% of the ailments that you would have in your life on your own and save time from having to go to the emergency department. Another scenario is if you're walking down the street and you trip on something, you fall, and you twist your ankle. Now let me clarify this. If you have any obvious deformities, this is not what I'm talking about. Those people need to go to the emergency department. I'm talking about, you fall, you stand up, it hurts real bad to stand on it, but there's no deformities. Your ankle may be really big, but you don't have a toe pointing in the wrong direction. All right. If you fall into that category, you need to go home. You would take some Tylenol. Tylenol will reduce the inflammation process of the area, and it helps take care of some of the pain. Then you would start what's called RICE therapy. RICE stands for rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And it works like this. You have to rest the extremity that's hurt by staying off it as much as possible. When you're at home and you're watching a 1 hour long program, on every commercial break, you would apply ice to the affected area. And once the commercial was over, you would take the ice off. Compression is the use of an ACE wrap when you do have to be on your foot that's hurt to help stabilize it. And elevation means raising that extremity above the level of the heart, which keeps the blood flow from flowing down to the area, making it swell more and causing more pain. Now, by doing that simple process of treatments, you can treat effectively 50 to 60% of the minor injuries which you would receive in your life and save time at the emergency department. Now, I know this isn't common knowledge for most people, but that's why I would highly recommend people invest in some form of home reference. As a matter of fact, these treatments that I just discussed with you came out of a home reference in which I bought at my local store. To wrap this up, I'd like to say that we've covered why people go to the emergency room, how they feel when they go to the emergency room, and we started to discuss ways to avoid going to the emergency room with home treatments for illnesses such as fevers and diarrhea, or injuries such as a sprained ankle. We also covered some medications and even a reference in order to learn more. And by doing these things, you can adequately reduce the amount of time you spend in the emergency department and treat your injuries at home.